All right, so this week we're talking about what was my life verse for a really long time. Probably many of us have life verses that connect with us on some level that really speak to us. For me, it was Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. And for the longest time, I used to think that I knew what that meant. You'd think you'd know what your life verse meant. But as I reflected on it some more, because it sounds pretty simple theologically speaking, I do trust in the Lord with all my heart. I do lean on Him for my own understanding, and I think for a lot of us, perhaps we think that we're doing exactly that simply because of faith. I have faith in Jesus Christ. I put my trust in Him, and therefore, I'm doing it, and it's that easy. I've prayed the sinner's prayer, and therefore I do trust Him for the securing of my soul and all of these things, and perhaps many of us do. But I found that it's way more difficult than that. It's one thing to say that I am trusting God for faith in the eternal, the future, but how do I live my day-to-day life? And as far as I started to realize, I believed that for me, as long as I had that initial salvation experience, I thought that that's what this verse was talking about. Because over time, we all learn things about life. We all discover things about the way that the world works. And we think that we have a little bit of understanding, or think, well, if I'm saved, then my understanding is being informed by God. But that isn't necessarily the case. See, more often than not, my understanding is probably flying in the face of God's understanding. How I think the way that the world works, how I think a situation is panning out, might be actually different than what is actually going on. If I was trusting in the Lord with my whole heart, then I shouldn't be leaning on my own understanding. And I found that over time, I was gaining more and more confidence in my own ability to interpret the world. And that's really limiting because it's based in my own experience. And worse than that, my experience is skewed. It's skewed by my own ideas of right and wrong, my own ideas of justice, my own ideas of equity, my own ideas of pleasure and pain, and that's all tainted by my sin. And so my understanding is limited by my preferences. And thus my selfish ideas of the way that the world works shouldn't be it's not ultimately a useful barometer for the way that things actually are. I need God's perspective, and that's really more what this verse is, because thinking not in my own understanding is very challenging, and that's what this verse is calling us away to. It says acknowledging Him, and it's not just simply paying lip service. Yes, God, I've prayed. Yes, God, I've accepted you. Therefore, you must be in control of all of these facets of my life. But the truth is, I keep getting caught up by what I actually experience. And this is why I have a problem. I look at my life and I feel like, well, God, I am trusting you. I am leaning on you, but it is often hard to acknowledge you in everything when things seem to go bad, seem to go poorly. And my path rarely seems straight. It seems very crooked, which in turn then makes my trust even more tenuous. And it's silly, but I just recently discovered, perhaps I'm not so great at what is my life verse. Maybe I wasn't paying so much attention to the fact that I find it very difficult to not just lean purely on my own understanding. And I'm not talking about faith strictly speaking. We all have a measure of that if we've come to faith in Jesus. I think that this verse is talking about as faith requires more than I simply believe that He is. This is that verse in Hebrews 11:6 which says, we must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So I can't just say, well, yeah, I believe, therefore I'm fulfilling the requirements of that verse. And this is difficult because perhaps for many of us, we haven't seen that reward, that He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek us. Maybe we haven't experienced such a straight path. And so we wonder, why do we feel like we aren't being led straight? Why do we feel like there's so much things in our path? And this has to do with our understanding, our interpretation. And again, the reward is not cash and prizes, but perhaps many of us do think, well, I should have encountered some reward by now. my path should be a little straighter at this point. And I think part of this has to do with the fact that when we are looking at ourselves, when we're using our own interpretive grid, when it's our understanding, when it's our leaning, then it's very easy to say, I haven't seen much reward, my path isn't so straight, and it's probably that last part is we aren't acknowledging him in every way, or we're finding it difficult to acknowledge him in any way because we're interpreting that acknowledgement as rewards and specific ways that our paths are supposed to work out. And really what we're supposed to be doing is actually leaning in God for all of that. He is the one informing our understanding. He isn't helping me interpret this day. He isn't helping me interpret this pain. He is helping me move through and gain any kind of understanding. And you don't get that unless you're actually leaning into him. You're actually relying on him for your support. You're relying on his grace and help in time of need. Trusting in him and not yourself. And this is very difficult to do, especially when you've lived a life that is completely reliant on yourself, on your own understanding, on your own your own way of doing things. And this is really what the walk of faith is all about. It's about letting go to a certain degree and trusting in God's interpretation to the world, God's view of reality, and making it your own. And the more and the better you get at that, the more you discover that you're leaning on his understanding and not your own. And so don't make the mistake I did of just thinking, well, I've prayed the sinner's prayer, I go to church, in this case I'm a pastor, whatever it might be, and think therefore I'm naturally leaning on his understanding. I'm naturally trusting. I'm naturally acknowledging him in all his ways. Because it's way more than just the idea of faith. We are attempting to lay it all down in front of him for him to lead the path. And that is where you eventually do find. It's as you look behind you and you realize my path has been a little bit straighter since I've stopped interpreting all this from my own perspective, my own worldview, my own circumstances, and started to accept, take Jesus at his word. And that really is part of the essence of faith, is taking the word of God at face value, taking Jesus at his word, and following behind humbly as you attempt to navigate life. So hopefully that'll help a little bit in that we all need to discover to be a little bit more humbly to navigate life according to how God teaches, God directs, and not merely I've prayed the sinner's prayer and therefore I'm doing great. It's okay to admit we're not doing so great, even if you've already done that. And this is partially how. Learning to acknowledge him and learning to lean into him. So hope that's helps a little bit, at least for this, understanding this verse a little bit and putting it into practice. Thanks. Have an awesome day.